I'm Carla Reeves, and this is Differently, the Lifepreneur podcast. I'm a hyperachiever turned lifepreneur, and after a decade of coaching ambitious leaders, I'm convinced we are far closer than we realize to what we deeply desire, and it's a willingness to do differently that can change everything. This podcast is for the everyday leader ambitious for a rich, out-of-the-box life. This is your weekly nudge and reminder to take a risk to build a life that is uniquely bold, authentic, and in alignment with your deepest values. If you're beginning to think about goals and planning for the new year and how you might want to spend your time more intentionally, this episode is for you. My guest today is Ashlee Livingstone. Her purpose is working with leaders and teams to build thriving cultures. She builds connections between people, their goals, and the broader community. In this conversation, she takes us into her own personal story of leaving corporate and becoming an entrepreneur so that she could align her living with her larger values. She takes you into her thoughtful approach to time, boundaries, and planning differently for the new year, or any time of year for that matter. There are some tangible gems near the end that, if implemented, one of those could be a game changer for you and your life. Ashlee and I invite you into our conversation. May it stir your thinking and inspire fuller living wherever you find yourself today. Hey, Ashlee, welcome to Differently. I'm excited that you're here.
Yeah, thank you so much, Carla. I'm very excited for our conversation.
We had a mutual friend introduce us, so I'm excited about that. And why don't we have you start with your story? How did you get started on this path of entrepreneurship and what you're doing today?
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I started a long time ago on this path, but I didn't really know that I was on it until I was like right in the mix of it. So way back when, probably about 15 years ago now, I had, the typical corporate job. I was doing everything that I thought I was supposed to do. I graduated high school, then I went to university, I got married, I got the career, and I was going through life really checking off all of those milestone boxes that I really thought I was supposed to do. And as I was in it, working, going to this 9 to 5 job every day, I somewhere along the line realized how much I didn't love it. And I would, complain to people or, vent about my day. And everyone just said, like, welcome to being an adult. This was the norm. This was what was to be expected, that you would get married, you would go to work every day, and you would be miserable like everyone else. And eventually you would retire and then live the best part of your life. And I did that and I really didn't enjoy it, but I just kind of followed the herd. And eventually when I wanted to grow my family, I started to hit hurdles, right? I started to have all these roadblocks along the way, and I struggled for about 5 years with infertility. And when I finally got pregnant, it was a high-risk pregnancy, and I had to go for appointments every week. So every week I had to take time off of work. I had to leave, my big important job to go make sure that my pregnancy was viable and that everything was on track. And my boss at the time would call me every time I left on my way to this high-risk pregnancy appointment and assign me work due the next day. And I just, again, assumed that, well, yeah, of course I'm supposed to be working. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. And I took on all of that pressure and stress. And finally, it was actually my mom. So big shout out to the mama bears out there who said, that's enough. And she talked to my doctor, and next thing I knew, I was off on sick leave. And I didn't know it then, but that was the first time that I got off that path, that should path, that you're supposed to path. And now I was on this completely unknown foreign landscape to me. And I had all this choice that I've never had before. And I started thinking about what it would be like to actually get to spend quality time with my baby. And what kind of parent did I want to be? And how did I want to contribute financially to my family? What brought me joy? Like I finally created a bit of space to ask myself questions that nobody had ever asked me. And I definitely had never asked myself. And then I decided to not go back to work in the traditional sense. And I started my own business where I got to take my son to school every day, or I would do work while he was napping and when he went to bed. And I launched my business when he was a baby. And now I still get to walk him to school and pick him up from school. I take most of the summer off. I'm off over Christmas. Like I get to create such time freedom and connection because I chose to create that. And I realized at some point that I had a choice in doing that.
Mm. Our stories are so similar, almost identical, like checking the boxes that I thought would make up that happy, successful life. And then getting to the point and realizing that those boxes were not leading me at all where I wanted to go. And so I want to have you speak to, that part where we are stuck in that normal, like this is how life is supposed to be. These are the boxes we're supposed to check and everybody else is doing it. So it must be right. But there's like this, unrest inside, right? That's like, there's something not right. That for me, it was like, I knew there had to be another way, but you either get to that point where you're just resigned and you just continue to go through the motions until, like you said, something starts to break. And that's what happened for me. But speak to that part where we know there's something not right. And what for you, like, and maybe in the people that you've worked with too, how do we pay attention sooner? How do we nurture that part that knows and, start to ask different questions and challenge the rules we've really assigned ourselves to, right? By just kind of looking around the world and saying, this is what everybody else is doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely comfortable to do that. It's easy to swim that way. I think when you feel, and what I had to lean into was I had that little tingle, if you will, in the pit of my stomach that, when I would drive to that job, that tingle felt like heavy dread. It sat there and I would sit in my car and have to pep talk myself to get out every day. And I would wonder who on my team was going to cry today. Like who was our boss going to make cry today? Was it going to be me or was it going to be someone else? And that was happening ongoing. And there was this part of me that just knew better, but I didn't give her much voice. And it wasn't until I started really writing and asking that part of myself, if not this, then what? Because I think that's a big question. If not this, then what? And a lot of us know not this, right? We have that like not this, not this, not this, but we don't ask ourselves, if not this, then what? And once I started allowing myself to dream again, even if it's like those daydreams, or if I didn't do this job, then what would I do? And I started listening to all of the blocks that were going to prevent me from making change. um, pension, benefits, money. How would I make the same amount of money? Security, all of these things. And I realized that all of that was just there to keep me safe. And I really had to spend a lot of time writing and challenging those beliefs. It was an uncomfortable process. And I'll be honest, I still do it now. I still have times where I'll be doing something and I'll get the, ooh, not this. Okay, then explore it. Spending a lot of time exploring why I feel a certain way and what am I trying to get to. So if you're someone who's kind of stuck in that daily grind and you call it that, or the hustle or the busy, you're busy being busy and you think that this is the only way, I would just challenge you to write down all of the dreams that you might have, or all of the wishes, or if you could do anything, what would it look like? And just let yourself dream and see if something keeps coming back to you. Right? What can you latch on to? That's your anchor.
So many good things here. And so two things, well, there's three things I want to talk about. One is, you're speaking of, asking yourself different questions. And I think that so often in life, we're looking for answers, right? We know something's not right and we're looking for answers. And I think one of the most powerful things we can do is ask different questions, because you can almost feel a door open when you ask a different question. Instead of not this, I don't like this isn't working, but what if I did something different? It's like you can almost feel the door open that was closed before. So I love the idea of asking different questions. Of course, I love the tool of writing, because that's really at the roots of everything that I do. So much power in getting beyond the noise of the world, the noise of the mind, and to really settle in and really listen, right? Because there's so many answers when we just get still enough or quiet enough. But I want to go back to one piece that you said, because I hear my clients struggling with this is, how do you know when you need to push yourself, and when past that, this isn't working state, how do you know when to push yourself and when to really listen to yourself, right? That there's a change that needs to occur, because I hear my clients grapple with that a lot. Do I just need to work harder and push past this, or do I really need to listen and make a change? How do you know for yourself?
Yeah, this has come with a lot of practice, and it's an ongoing practice. I always think when people embark on any type of personal development journey, or they're using different containers and to do that work, one of the biggest myths is that you're done, that there's a finish to it, but it's an ongoing practice. So for me, I think I realized when I kept having the same block over and over of, okay, it'll get better. I just have to get through budgeting, right? Maybe it's budget season at work and everyone's cranky. It'll get better when we're done the budget. And it might for a couple days, but then it comes back. So that for me was one of the telltale external signs, was when things just kept going back to normal, and normal didn't feel good. And then sitting with myself and really asking, is this what I really want? And then trying to listen into my body for that full body yes. Because we all know when we have a full body no, right? You feel very activated. You can feel, your stomach turn. Maybe for me, that's what it is. My stomach turns and then my throat gets tight, and my head starts to spin a little bit. And that's when I know it's a full body no. There's nothing in me that wants to push through. And then when it's just resistance, it's more of that procrastination maybe that comes up, or the, yes, I want this, but I don't know how to get it. And that's the difference, the full body no versus that procrastination feeling of yes, but how?
Yeah.
And then trying to figure out the next steps.
I think our body has so much wisdom, right? That we
Yes.
don't often tune into, and it's such a vehicle for knowledge and knowing and understanding things, and that we maybe don't understand in the mind, but we already feel in the body. And I know for myself, learning to tune into that more, there's so much wisdom there for guiding your life. Okay, so let's pivot a little bit to going back to your story, and you start to build a business at home. I built my business also when my kids were napping and after I left corporate America. So I understand all of that. And it sounds like you had to learn how to manage your time and set kind of good, healthy boundaries around family, probably, and work. And so take us through some of that journey for you, because I know you're an advocate for time freedom and ditching the to-do list, and you have a different perspective. So take us into that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely when you are working from home, and, I said to, I've been working from home before people had to with COVID. So I feel like when that happened, I was years ahead of the game. And so the time management piece, and I find that, even the term time management seems very prescriptive. And it also, like the word boundaries, has this restriction wrap around it. And that is exactly the opposite of how I want to feel. I do not want to feel restricted. In fact, I seek freedom and ease. So anything that is kind of wrapped in restriction, I reject. So when I think about how I manage my time, I really focus on what the highest priority is. And am I carving out space in my calendar to do that? So, in a practical sense, for me, it looks like time blocking. So, actually going into my calendar on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and blocking the time to do the work that I need to do. And, so things like this, like our podcast recording shows up in my calendar as a blocked meeting. And that's how most people will block their time. So they know when they have meetings. But what they don't necessarily do is block time ahead of that meeting to prepare for it, or in some cases after it to apply action items. And we tend to leave meetings feeling completely overwhelmed because you're probably going right into the next meeting and you have no time to take the to-dos and put them somewhere. So they go on this giant to-do list. And when you have a to-do list, just looking at it, it's this giant list of line after line after line, and it keeps growing. Yeah, there's like an immediate hit of pleasure when you cross something off, but it doesn't overwhelm all the things that you've added to the bottom of that list. And when you have a to-do list, it doesn't tell you priority, and it doesn't tell you how long something's going to take or when it's actually due. So when we can take things off that to-do list and put it directly in our calendar, it takes all of the thinking out of when to do things, what's the priority, have I even blocked time to do it, off. It's completely out of our heads and it's in our calendar. I always can say it's like helping future you out. Mm. And when I had my son at home, my time was very limited. And granted, my business was much smaller at that point. So it was everything in scales. But I was so strategic with what, if I have an hour and a half right now, what work do I need to really focus on? What's going to be the biggest bang for my hour and a half? And then prioritizing that work. And, not spending as much time in my emails or not spending time invoicing. I know invoicing is important, but that's outsourcing for me. But figuring out what is the most important priority and how much time does it take, and then spend that time doing it.
Okay. So stop there for a second and take us into, how do you determine those priorities? And then how are you sort of using your priorities as you're blocking your calendar? Because I know people struggle with, well, one, how do I set my priorities? How do I know what's a priority? Because it feels like everything's a priority, right?
Yeah. So that's, for me, I go back to my goals. And if you haven't started with goals, I always find, so we're recording this in end of November. So depending on when it comes out, it's a great time. Everyone's thinking goals, right? I don't want to say New Year's resolutions because that's such a triggering thing for many people, but it's goal setting time. So start with your goals. What do you want? Like, what do you really, truly want and desire? So if it is, you want to grow your business, you want X number of new clients in the first quarter. Well, how are you going to get that? You're going to get that by doing sales calls. So prioritizing outreach and sales calls, because this is your number one goal. So is answering every single email that comes into your inbox really a priority? Probably not, unless it's booking a sales call. So that's just like, again, a quick way to do it, but making sure if it's not on your calendar, chances are you're not going to do it. That's where that resistance and that procrastination comes in, right? But when it has a clean, clear block in your calendar, that's the time you've set aside to do it. And here's where a lot of people will say, like, that feels restrictive. You can move it, right? Just because it's there doesn't mean you can't move it. So if I have time blocked to do sales calls, but then I get an opportunity to do a podcast interview, and that's a higher priority item for me, I can move my sales calls to a different time or different day, but it's still a time on my calendar that gets blocked out. I don't delete it because it's a priority. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It's so important because I think for a lot of people and people listening, my listeners, like, a lot of people feel like they're just at the mercy, right, of that to-do list or the demands of others or the boss or whatever it is, if they're working inside of a job, and you feel like you have no power. And I think that what you're speaking to is having that list of goals or those commitments, right? That you're those larger rocks in your life that you're committed to. And like you, I kind of like to think about at the end of 2023, what do I want to look back and see? Where do I want to make some movement in my life, whether it's having a little more quality time with family or kids or whatever it is, or something related to your business, and then kind of, have that on a sheet of paper, because that literally guides my choices and actions today, right? And what I'm going to block on that calendar. And so for people listening, that set of goals or commitments is so vital. And it's because I can forget too. I can wake up tomorrow and kind of forget what my priorities are. And if I didn't have that, then I'm likely scheduling and making time for things that are not the largest priority. They're the loudest priority at the moment.
Yes.
This is really how you move from a place of kind of feeling chaotic in your life to having more power and influence and control in your life. So good.
Yeah,
So,
and something
go
to
ahead.
add to that. Sorry. Okay, so this is where I think too, the New Year's resolution thing gets lost. we come up with a goal. So I'll even just say goal of, I want to be physically fit. Okay. We just say that we want to be physically fit. This is a common goal. We say it out loud. Maybe we even do write it down. Okay. Hey, everyone, this is what my New Year's resolution is. Here's my goal for 2023. But then we don't break that down. That's just a big goal. And what I learned was that we really have to say, okay, so what does looking physically fit or being physically fit look like to me? And then I could say, okay, well, to me, that means this, this, and this, right? So I give myself some examples of how I will know when I feel physically fit. Because just to say that is you can't put any kind of tangible guidelines around it. So breaking it down. So I'm going to then make sure that I walk 10,000 steps a day. Okay. So that's a habit that's going to feed my goal. So I'm going to walk 10,000 steps a day. I'm going to drink water before coffee, maybe. And I am going to hire a personal trainer to go and see this personal trainer once a week. Okay, so these are my habits that I'm going to do that are going to feed and support my goals. And then I put it on my calendar. So if I need 10,000 steps a day, for me, that looks like walking my son to school every morning. So that's blocked out. There are no meetings that happen for me before I get home from walking my kid to school. And then at the end of the day, I stop working at 3:00 so that I can walk and pick him up. And that helps me get my 10,000 steps a day. And that happens Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. It's in there. And that time is just saved. If it's once a week for that personal trainer, go ahead, book the trainer, and then pre-book all of your appointments. So that time is sacred. It's carved out in your calendar. When we just let life happen and we try and squeeze everything in, that's when you feel the overwhelm, the constant busy, that hamster wheel, and you let go of your goals because, like you said, the louder things take over.
Yeah, it's so true. And I lived a lot of years of my life feeling at the mercy of all of that. And it's exhausting and it's frustrating. And there are places where you do have power to kind of pull back. And I know you talk a lot about boundaries. And I have found in my own life and the work I do with clients that boundaries are really big when it comes to time. Because for my listeners and people, I'm sure like you too, Ashlee, it's like we often don't have space or capacity to add more, or we don't want to add more. Mm-hmm. I find that the places where you can harness tons of time and energy are looking to those old beliefs, right? Old patterns of behaviors where we're wasting time and energy that maybe isn't necessary anymore. It might have helped us survive, right, for a period of our life or gotten us to this level of success in our life. But to level up now, it requires a different behavior. And so speak a little bit to the boundaries that you talk about and teach about.
Yeah. So I always start with does this feel good? If you are working late because you feel that you have to, but then you complain about it all the time, that's usually a good sign that something has to change, right? You, in theory, don't want to go through your life complaining about things all the time. If you volunteer at your kid's school, 2 or 3 times a week, and you've signed up for every committee that exists because you have been told that that's what a good mom does, but you hate it, you dread it, it's sucking the life out of you, that's a good place to consider, this is where I need a boundary. So first, again, I always encourage you back to, is this fueling me? Is this bringing me joy? Not other people, me joy. So do I want to keep it or do I want to ditch it? And then when we establish boundaries, so even when I started working from home and I needed boundaries of my time between family and work, the first step is you have to decide what the boundary is. So for me, it was, I'm going to close my door. And when I'm working, you're not coming in. And I had to tell people this. This is the other key piece of setting boundaries is you have to communicate the boundary. You have to communicate the boundary to the people or peoples that it is going to affect or who need to know this boundary. So even if it's your inbox and you're not checking emails on your vacation, put a note of office. So that's how we communicate it. You have to communicate your boundary. People cannot read your mind, and they're not just going to assume you have a boundary. Okay, this is where we make a bit of a mistake in it, and it's uncomfortable. People don't like to have to communicate that they have a boundary. But my door's closed. Unless there's like blood or the house is on fire, please do not come in. Right? I've even had to describe emergency situations. That is okay. But the door is closed. And when the door gets open, when it's not supposed to, I just close it again. I don't even engage in the conversation because it's just, nope, I'm working. And I close it. I don't give in and be like, they crossed my boundary. They did this, they did that. If I allow them to come in, and I get wrapped up in whatever it is they want to talk to me about, I have let them cross my boundary. They didn't cross my boundary. I let them cross my boundary. Nobody can cross your boundaries unless you allow them to. So that's why, again, it's be clear with what your boundary is, communicate it, and then you have to be the one to hold it. And this is where we tend to waver.
Yeah, I respect that so much because there's so much personal responsibility in that, right? And so if the boundary isn't working, then what I hear you saying is it's also your job to recommunicate. And sometimes we have to communicate multiple times with the people in our life. And I also hear you saying you can do it with a lot of grace and love. It doesn't have to be aggressive or mean or angry or anything like that.
Yeah. And when you communicate and then hold your boundaries, whether it's at home or at work, I also see that as a little bit of you giving permission to other people to create boundaries too, right?
100%.
When I model healthy boundaries for my son, I'm also teaching him that he can have boundaries, right? When his door is closed and I knock before going in, he gets to say, yes, come in, or no, give me a minute. No, it's about doing that. If you're a leader at work and you have an out of office and you're not checking your emails when you're on vacation, you've also just given permission to all of those that you lead that they too get to disconnect and hold that boundary. It's actually such an empowering, freeing feeling.
Completely agree. And there's so much respect there too. I hear so much mutual respect, and you're modeling that for your children. And so good. Okay. So let's come back to this time of year. And, we are thinking about and planning and creating what we want to bring into our life over this next year. And this idea of time freedom. What are some tangible things that my listeners can be thinking about and doing differently as we approach this new year? Like if there were 3 things that maybe you help people with or you do in your own life that would really set them up to do differently come this next year, what would you recommend?
Oh, that's such a good question. So for me, I like bite size. So maybe that's the first difference is don't go big. Go small. and build from there. So if you look at the entire year and you have lots of goals, let's break it down even month by month. So when you start January, start with one goal and those healthy habits that are going to feed that goal. And once you build momentum with that goal, now introduce another one. We have this tendency to go all or nothing, and it's too much for us. It's okay to say it's too much for us. So start small. That would be one. The other one is just spend time by yourself. Carve out time every day by yourself. And I don't mean hiding in the bathroom, right? So if that means getting up half an hour before the rest of your family, or whatever it looks like for you. So that's a big thing for me. I'm always up at an hour before the rest of my family. I don't talk to anyone. I have a silent morning. I practice breath work, or I move my body, or I journal. It doesn't have to be the same every day, but that space is mine. And I'm super intentional about it. That's how I lean into, am I feeling okay? What do I want? So spending time by myself. And then the third one, I don't know, it's like discovering self-leadership. We are so used to, I think you mentioned this at the beginning, looking and asking questions and seeking answers from lots of other places. And what we don't realize is that we have the answers ourselves. So when you start spending more time by yourself and asking yourself questions, you're going to discover that you actually don't need to seek validation or explanation from other people. So start asking yourself those questions and developing your own internal self-leadership, because when you can lead yourself, you're going to be so much more effective at leading everyone else, whether it's at home or at work or socially, whatever it is. So just asking yourself different questions.
For those of you listening, so many gems right there. I mean, really, it's like sometimes we think we have to do so much, or we have to put so much on the list of goals for next year. And honestly, if my listeners were to take one of those habits, sort of healthy habits you just described, those in and of themselves have been game changers in my life. I mean, really, like setting aside, getting up before my children got up, that was a game changer for me. And I still have that practice, even though my kids are grown now. And, writing and getting quiet, another game changing practice. So, one of those healthy habits implemented could ripple to every other area of your life. I know that from personal experience. And so powerful. And then the self-leadership, you're right. Like you start to focus on your inner world and your self-leadership, and everything else starts to shift and look a little bit different in your life. So powerful.
Yeah.
And this idea also, I think we've talked a little bit about these structures, right? And people can feel like they're restrictive or whatever. I always believe that structure creates freedom. So if anybody's listening and you're feeling like the blocking of your calendar or whatever it is feels restrictive, structure actually creates freedom. Like I love creating containers in my life, because then I have freedom to play inside of the container, and it's pretty amazing.
Yeah. The time blocking for me, I can look, Sunday night, I looked ahead at my week, and it just completely released. Sunday I thought, oh no, what's coming up this week? Did I think about this? Did I do that? And then I looked and I'm like, past Ashlee already did it for me, right? I helped myself out, And I am now looking forward to my week with just this sense of freedom and calm. And I feel so in control, knowing that if something comes, it's okay because I can make an easy shift and it's not overwhelming my system because I'm prepared for it. I'm not entering the week already spiraling, not knowing what's going on.
Well, and you can hear like these, like innovation and creativity and adaptability, right? Like these are all entrepreneurial skills that we can bring to our
Mhm.
everyday life. That's something I'm really passionate about teaching because it does give you freedom. So, Ashlee, tell us what are you doing as you plan the next year and how do you work with people? Give us a little sense of that.
Yeah, thank you. So for me, I'm starting the goal setting process right now, and my family and I are actually going to do it together. And we have decided it's one goal a month that we're going to focus on and hold each other accountable for. I think that's another big piece is having accountability partners, not judgment partners, loving accountability partners. So that's one thing that we're starting on. And the way that I work with people is I actually help people develop self leadership. So whether you are a leader at work or a leader at home and you just keep hitting the same block, like you're wondering why do I keep trying these things, or I read this book or listen to this show and it's not clicking for me. That's how I work with people. And the way I do it is through coaching, but I am also a trained hypnotherapist and breathwork facilitator. And I use those modalities to help us figure out what is blocking you and then infusing new healthy habits to help you kind of up level your leadership.
Beautiful. And where can my listeners find out more about you and what you're doing?
Yeah. So my website is ourforte.ca. So it's OURFORTE.ca. I'm also on Instagram at ourforte or LinkedIn. I also spend a lot of time on LinkedIn as well, if you want to follow me there.
Perfect. So check out what Ashlee is doing and take some of these gems into your own planning process for this year. I love this time of year. I love thinking about and creating the next year and kind of plotting some things to make some shifts and do differently as the year comes. So Ashlee, thank you so much for joining us here today. And thank you for your time and wisdom.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I always enjoy talking about time and boundaries and healthy habits. So it's been a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Differently. I hope it stirred your thinking, and I invite you to take one inspired action from something that stood out to you. If you want to hear more conversations like this, hit follow on your favorite podcast app. And if this episode could impact someone you know, please share it and pass it along. Remember, new episodes drop weekly. See you next week.